Welcome back to another episode of the Two Christian Dudes podcast, where Randy Kay and I have fascinating conversations with amazing people. If you've been following all along throughout season one, we are talking about near death experiences. And today's guest is no exception. Today, we are going to be talking with Heidi Bar. She's going to tell us about her experience. She's also going to tell us about her experiences as a hospice nurse. We're going to have a lot of ground to cover in today's conversation. Randy, let me pitch it to you. Let's jump into the conversation.
It's great to have you, Heidi. And you have a unique perspective from a couple of points of view, one of which is as a hospice, Sean mentioned, as a hospice nurse. Yeah. So you have dealt with people who are going through the death process. And so we'd like to glean from you how your perspective in having encountered the Lord after your near-death experience, how that has impacted your work with those who are dying, but also something very important, and I think quintessential to you as a person and a believer, and that is that you are Jewish. Mm-hmm. And many of those viewing this will be Christian, but there may be some that are agnostic, atheist, Jewish, what have you. And you had talked about the fact that your being Jewish really aligns itself perfectly with your having encountered Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. But first, we want to start with your encounter, your near-death encounter, and your horseback riding incident, and what happened. So start us there, if you would, on your journey to heaven.
I was 16 years old. I was riding my horse bareback out at the ranch where we boarded her in Iowa. We lived in Iowa. My sisters were there. I had at the time one sister was 14 and she was in the car because she's allergic to horses with the windows rolled up. And the other sister, my little sister, was 11. And I had taken my horse out by myself because my friend couldn't ride with me that day. She was sick. So I had been out riding the end of April. I had just gotten my license a few weeks before. And after about an hour or so, I decided to come back to the barn because I figured my sisters were getting bored. So I headed back to the barn, and above the barn was what we called the Ridge Trail. It was a trail along a hill that overlooked the barn, overlooked the valley on the far side of the barn, overlooked the valley in front of the barn. And I rode to the end of the Ridge Trail. It was a dead end. There was no way to get off other than to go back and go down to the barn. And I was just sitting there enjoying the view when I heard hoofbeats behind me. And I knew exactly who it was. It was a man on an out-of-control Arabian. And he was coming pretty fast. So I just stayed on my horse because most horses, when they're running out of control, will run back to the barn. And I assumed the horse would do that. But instead, the horse, with the man flapping wildly and crazily on his back, came down the Ridge Trail. And I kind of froze. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should jump off my horse because I was afraid I would be trampled if there was an interaction between the two horses. I thought, okay, once this horse sees my horse standing calmly, he will stop. But he didn't. And he ran into my horse. My horse reared up. At the first time she reared, I dropped the reins and just grabbed her neck. The second time she reared up, she stepped backwards off the Ridge Trail and flipped over upside down onto me. So we flipped off the trail down the slope. She rolled across my body. And as she hit my chest, I knew I was dead. Every cell in my body stood stock still, and I knew I was dead, and I instantly left my body. And I was 30, 40 feet up in the air. Watching, I saw my horse roll over my body, and my body was tossed like a rag doll. I didn't care. My body meant nothing to me. I knew it was me immediately. I knew that was me, but I didn't care. I saw my horse right herself and slide down the slope and head to the barn. I saw my middle sister put her hands against the car window with a look of horror on her face. I saw my little sister scream and cover her face with her hands. I saw the man on the Arabian run. The Arabian turned and ran down the other trail towards the barn. I saw a lot of commotion in the barn, which was odd because the barn faced away from me, but I could see into the barn. And the only thing I had one thought in my head at that moment, one thought, and that was, I wish my sisters didn't have to see me die. That was the only thought I had. I did not care that I was dead. And at that moment, I noticed there was a light over my shoulder, over my right shoulder. And as I as I had that thought, I saw that the light was illuminating everything before me. And suddenly I realized it was a light, but it was a man. The light was emanating from this man. And he moved forward until he was beside me. I looked at him and I recognized him immediately. It was as if I said, "Hi, how are you?" I knew him. I had always known him. I'd known him since I was a small child. It was Jesus, which didn't strike me as being odd at all at that moment. It should have been odd because my father is an atheist, my mother's an agnostic, and even though we were part of an Orthodox community, my father told us on an almost daily basis, and I am sorry if I offend anyone, that Jesus Christ is the biggest hoax ever perpetrated on mankind. And Christianity was a hoax. And Christians were stupid for having hope because my father believes that there is no heaven, there is no hell, there's no God. When you die, you're buried and forgotten. You are no more significant than the tiniest speck of dust in this infinite universe. So Jesus is the last person I should have encountered, and he was the first person, and he was the first person I encountered.
Well, I'm curious to hear, Heidi, in terms of like you knew it was Jesus. A lot of our friends that we've talked to about their experiences talk about how, in heaven, they're able to communicate, but it's more of like a thought to thought or almost a knowing kind of communication where you just know you don't even have to try to communicate. So when you encountered Jesus, did he, so to speak, say anything to you, or what was what were you feeling or sensing in that first part of your journey?
Well, we immediately recognized he recognized me, but he I we were talking. We spoke the entire time we were together. I can't tell you everything we said now because even though when I was dead, I knew everything that was going on, and what I realized was all my questions were answered. Um, all those existential questions, all those nagging questions. Why am I here? What's the meaning of life? Is there a God? Is there heaven? It was all answered. I had no more questions. And Jesus and I had all the time in the world because time was immaterial. Time simply wasn't a factor, but we communicated. Did my lips move? I do not know that my lips moved, but we could still communicate. It was heart to heart. It was mind to mind. We communicated about my life. Uh, we communicated about pretty much everything. And the thing is, I had known him since I was a little kid. I had always believed in God despite my parents. And um, I realized that he was the one I had been talking to my entire life when I prayed at night. And I would have conversations with God every night. That was him. He'd been by my bedside. And I always had a tangible feeling that he was there. So, yes, we did talk. How we talked, I don't know. Did we say things aloud? I heard him in my head. So maybe.
Heidi, that your unique perspective. So it's not, we like to class people as believers, agnostic, atheists, and it sounds like you had believed in God and you had prayed to God. You've been told that Jesus Christ was a fake. He wasn't true. And so, how was that to go from a point where you believed in God to now you're face to face with Jesus Himself? I mean, is that something where all of a sudden you discovered that this person who you've been told was a fake was now real? How did you encounter that as somebody who believed in God, but not necessarily Jesus Christ?
For me, it was recognizing an old friend. It was not, I knew him, and it was as if I turned to him and said, I know you. I had known him since before I was born. I had always known him, and I recognized him. I had no difficulty recognizing him. Um, and as weird as it is to say this, it didn't surprise me. It didn't shock me. It was a reunion. We He and I had a reunion. We had a joyous reunion. That's the best way I can describe it. Because I just turned to him and I said, "I know you." And and he started to laugh. So he didn't say, and he didn't, there was no chest thumping. I am Jesus, believe in me. I always say that. People think, did he come at you with fire and brimstone? Did he announce himself? No. I simply knew who he was. There was no doubt in my mind. There was no question. He was Jesus. And he had always been with me. He was my best friend, my father, my brother, everything. He was everything to me in that moment.
Next, Heidi, let's talk about kind of crossing the barrier. Yeah, in preparation for the interview, I listened to some of your other or watched some of your other YouTube videos, and I'd love to hear a little bit about kind of what it felt like to move or travel or move forward with Jesus. And then talk to us about what it was like to, cross the barrier, transcend, cross the veil, whatever words you want to put to it. Tell us about that part of your journey of kind of going from our space here over to the other side, so to speak.
You know, this is the best way I can describe it. It's like flying with Superman. He was so fun. He's he is so he's fun. He's funny. We laughed the whole time. He took my hand and we left the barn area. I had a life review actually in the barn area, but we left. I'm gonna be honest with you. How Where we went, I was so busy looking at his face that it was kind of hard for me to attend to what was happening behind him. So what I saw passing was, as I looked at his face, I could see things passing behind him. It seemed as if we were on Earth, we were passing things on Earth. I could see individual things. And we were basically surfing on a wave of light. I looked down and I could see both of our feet, and underneath our feet, our bare feet, was this rolling wave of light. So it was like body surfing, and the light was all colors. And it tickled the bottoms of my feet, and we were going faster and faster and faster. And I saw ahead briefly. It was a barrier, and I cannot explain the barrier, but it was as if we crossed a threshold. Think of it as a door. You're stepping through a threshold or stepping over a threshold. It was as if we crossed a threshold. And at that point, I couldn't differentiate. I couldn't see individual things at that point. All things became one thing, and that one thing was God. Now, I was still an individual. He was still an individual, but I saw that all of those things were God. And it was after we crossed the threshold, this particular threshold, that we came into a light. And do you want me to continue with that, or do you want to go back to something else?
I'll steal one of Randy's questions for a moment. I'd love
Okay.
to just hear a little bit more about your life review, because in terms of the people we've talked about so far, most of the folks that we've interviewed, they had their afterlife experience when they were well into adulthood, and obviously you're having this experience when you were 16. So, in terms of your life review, what does that look like for a 16-year-old? I'm kind of curious.
Well, I was a pretty good kid. I was having some issues at that time. I had experienced a great deal of abuse in my 16 years. And at that point, I was kind of fighting back, rebelling. I was using some drugs. I was hanging out with some kids I probably shouldn't have been hanging out with. And when I had my life review, Jesus didn't focus on that. He didn't say, I didn't get any lectures. I didn't get finger pointing. I didn't get don't use drugs. I didn't get don't hang out with those kids. What I got was a review, and it was actually pretty short because, as I said, I was a good kid. I was nice to people. Even if I was hurting myself, I was still pretty nice to people. And what he showed me, and he showed it to me because I was judging myself. Jesus was there pointing things out. he was there saying, well, why don't we look at this? Why don't we consider this? What do you think about that? But he wasn't judging me. I was judging me. And the one thing I saw and felt was if I hurt someone, if my words hurt someone, I felt what they felt. I understood the impact my words and actions had on other people. And it changed me. I am very not perfect, believe me. I can cuss with the best of them, and I can yell at my kids. I can yell at my husband. I get mad, but it changed me in that I'm aware of what I do. I'm aware of how my actions impact others, and I pay attention to myself. But as I said, my life review was pretty short because the only person I was really hurting was me. Um, and that, but the life review and some of the things I saw did impact me when I came back to life. And we can go over that later if you want.
We definitely want to do that, Heidi, because when you came back to life, obviously you were still attending to those who were in hospice care. But circling back to, by the way, if you write the next book, I do have your title for that book to consider, and that is Body Surfing with Jesus.
That's a really good title.
How does that sound? What do you think, Sean? You're the book publisher.
We'll have to be really specific with a subtitle so we can make some kind of a promise.
That might seem disrespectful, but and I apologize if that was.
It's not disrespectful. It was the most amazing thing I've ever done in my entire life. It was so fun. I did not have a tunnel. I know some people have a tunnel. No tunnel. This was beautiful. It was glorious. It was bright. It was amazing. But then how else are you going to interact with a teenager who pushes the envelope?
Wow. Yeah, that speaks volumes, doesn't it? How the Lord interacts with us where we're at the place we are in life. A lot of people, Heidi, talk about they want to know what Jesus looks like. What was he like physically, I guess, the spirit body, glorified body, and what kind of conveyance, the God of, let's say, the Old Testament Bible, which is the Bible that both Christians and Jews ascribe to, paints God seemingly in a little bit of a different picture. I don't believe that personally. I think they're one and the same. They're different stories and different facets that are explained throughout Scripture. However, the connotation for God oftentimes is in Old Testament is one of judgment, one of one who really is directing through the prophets and so on and so forth. And then the New Testament is one of Jesus Christ and returning good for evil and so on and so forth. So, if I could ask you, Heidi, if you might appease our audience, if you do have a description of Jesus Christ, and B, what it is that you found from your Jewish heritage. Granted, you weren't in maybe the Orthodox part of Judaism and practicing that, of that vantage point of God versus the God that you met in heaven.
Well, I actually had a pretty good Orthodox education because our synagogue was Orthodox, even though my parents didn't believe we went to the synagogue and spent a lot of time there. Jesus is perfect. He's perfection. He's well, Randy, you've probably experienced this, but his hair's about my length. It's a chestnut brown. He's got some streaks in it. It's wavy. He has a lean face with kind of scruff, beard and mustache, but not too long. He has beautiful mouth, a gorgeous smile. You can't look away from his smile. It's infectious. His eyes radiate all the joy in the universe, and this is really hard for me to tell anyone at first, they are blue. They are the most beautiful blue eyes I've ever seen. And I didn't want to say anything about that because even though people in my family have hazel eyes. My father has green eyes. Most Jewish people I know have brown eyes. He had blue eyes. I thought nobody's going to believe me if I say Jesus has blue eyes, but he has beautiful blue eyes. He's 5'10-ish, maybe somewhere between 5'9" and 5'11", 160 pounds. He's slender. He was wearing kind of a white robe. Clothing wasn't important to me. So I noticed he was wearing white. It appeared to be a robe. But what I noticed were his hands, which were slender. His fingers were long and tapering. He had beautiful nails. And I noticed his feet. He's like me. He has long feet and long toes, long, slender feet and long toes, which was really cool because I looked down at our feet when we were surfing. And the only thing I will say, which it may sound like an imperfection, but it wasn't. I really appreciated his nose because right here it was kind of crooked. And I thought, wow, he's got a crooked nose. That's so great. It gave his face so much character that it was just his face was the most real thing he was the most real person I've ever met in my life. He was the most real face I've ever looked at in my life. So that's what he looks like.
Well, that's probably the most detailed description I think we've ever gotten this far on the podcast. I'm intrigued. Many people do say that Jesus has blue eyes. You're certainly not the first person that has shared that feature or that aspect with us. I'd love to have you now, Heidi, pick up the story for, we kind of deviated from the journey through the veil or to the other side. So I guess pick up the journey and tell us what happened as you went to the other side. Where did things go from there?
Well, after we crossed this barrier and we approached this light, the only way I can describe this light is it was alive. How light can be alive. It was love. I describe it as a blemishless white light that was perfect. It took up my entire field of vision. Did not hurt my eyes. It did not burn me. And Jesus and I surfed, or we flew directly into the light. And I knew that light was love. I knew it was living, and I knew it was God. And Jesus took me straight to God, and I sat on his lap. And at that point in time, Jesus vanished. Well, he disappeared from my view, and he went into the light. He became part of the light. This is really hard to explain, and I can't explain it or describe it very well. But and I honestly couldn't see God's face. I was sitting. The next thing I knew, I found myself sitting on God's lap with my face buried in his chest and my arms around him. His arms were around me. I was kicking my feet like a little kid, and I never wanted to move. Now, did I look up at his face? No, I did not. And I don't know if I would have seen it if I had. I don't know. It was as if it was shrouded in clouds. I did not see his face. But here I am sitting on God's lap. And it was the most marvelous experience. It's beyond words. I felt loved. I felt that I belonged. I felt that I was home. I never wanted to leave him. I would have sat there for all eternity with my face buried in his chest, and I would never have moved.
I'm so engrossed with that, Heidi, that I forgot my next question to you. But I'll get it together here, because at that point you're so immersed in the presence of the Lord Jesus Christ. You're on this journey with him, and most of our guests have said that they didn't want to leave. I think all of them actually have said they didn't want to leave. So you are in this immersive relationship. What happened then in terms of your conversation with the Lord that caused you to have to return to this world?
Well, I realized when I was sitting on his lap and God and I didn't speak, I just knew he was love. I knew that how a light can be a man and a light at the same time, I don't know. How something can be living love, the living embodiment of love, I don't know. I have no clue. But he was. And as I sat there, and I did not want to lift my head, believe me, I just wanted to sit there. This infinite living God it was this, I'm going to describe it this way. I can't, this is the only analogy I can come up with. He kind of shifted so that I had to lift my head. And I saw that he pulled away a corner of himself, infinitely far away. He withdrew a corner of himself, like as if he was withdrawing an infinite sized robe. And when he withdrew that corner of himself, I could see what I can only describe as heaven. And the first thing I saw, which has, well, I hope I never forget, was grass. It was this amazing green grass. And remember, this was infinitely far away. And I could see every blade of every grass, every blade of grass, every single individual blade of grass. And it was a brilliant green. The colors were beyond what we have here. What the colors here on the most beautiful day are a shadow. They're just a reflection of what is in heaven. And then I could see flowers, and I could see every petal of every flower, and every vein in every petal of every flower, and every, what is the pistil and stamen of every flower, and every grain of pollen. I could see trees. I could see every leaf on every tree, every individual leaf, every vein in every leaf. And they were all moving, but there was no wind, but they were moving with the light, and they were singing the praises of God. The grass was singing. That was the thing that just awed me, was the grass. Every blade of grass was singing the praises of God. And I couldn't look away. And then I saw, as I looked farther, there was sort of a meadow, but I could see a pathway, and that was misty. That was kind of shrouded in clouds as well. There was as if there was a veil between that, what was coming down the pathway, and myself. I could see people were coming. I could hear singing, but I couldn't make anything out clearly. But I just saw people were coming towards me on that pathway. And remember, this was all infinitely far away. This was not right up close and right in front of my face. This was really far away, but I could see every detail. And it was at that moment, as I was staring at this, that Jesus came, and he stood right next to me, and he said, "You didn't die. You have to go back." And I buried my face back in God's chest. I said, "I'm not going back. I'm not going back." And he said, "You didn't die. You have to go back," in a very clear voice. His voice is clear as a bell. And I said, "No, I didn't. I'm not going back. I'm not going back." And he took my hand, and I was shrieking at him, "I'm not going back. I'm not going back. You can't make me go back." I was having this huge argument with him. And just as he pulled me off God's lap, I remember shrieking, "I'll feel pain." And uh, the next thing I knew, there was no surfing, there was no tunnel, there was nothing. Bam, we were right above my body. And I didn't want to get in my body, and he shoved me in. I was basically kind of, call it hoovering. I was hoovered in, like vacuumed in my body from underneath, and hit my face. Think about being shoved into a box and hitting the inside of the box. I hit the inside of my skull, and I panicked. I had the worst panic attack you can imagine. I didn't know I was trapped in this body. And the next thing I knew, Jesus was in my body with me. And the only way to describe it is to say that he smoothed my arms into my arms, and he smoothed my legs into my legs, and he made me one person again. And he said one last thing before he left me, which was, "Your life is in good hands," which is something that haunted me for years. And it took me a while to remember, to figure out how to open an eye, how to talk. And I was pretty badly injured, but I did eventually manage to crack open an eye. And I saw the ranch owner kneeling next to me crying. And I croaked out his name, and kind of the rest is history.
Mhm.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the more dramatic re-entering the body stories that we've had shared on the podcast thus
Yeah.
far. Um, no, I was so taken in by the story, Randy. I forgot where I was going to go with my next question. It just
See
shows
how enthralling you are,
how
Heidi?
good of a storyteller
Yeah.
that Heidi actually is. Oh, I know. This was more of a comment. I'm fascinated just by the kind of the heightened senses that you experience. We've talked to a number of guests where it's almost like they got to experience the fullness of what our spiritual senses are like, where with no limitations, everything is like HD, four dimensional, or
Yeah.
just some other that there's no comparison here on Earth for what we experience here with the heightened level of sensitivity that we have in heaven. So it's been a pretty continuous aspect of many people's stories. So just fascinated to hear how that you got to experience that level of senses as well. So you're back in your body, and
Mhm.
and clearly you're injured based on the accident that you had. Like
Yeah.
where do you go from here? We don't need to focus too long on this aspect of your journey, but I guess give us kind of the elevator pitch version of the story, because I know Randy wants to make sure we get to your work as a hospice nurse as well. Um, it sounds like you came back and you're still lying on the ground. What happens next?
I was kind of laying on my left side in a heap, and Charlie threw me over the horse, which is probably the last thing you want to do to someone who just died. But he threw me over the horse, went racing down to my car, threw me in the back of my car, drove right past the hospital, and took me home. And as I said, I have my family's a little odd, so he carried me upstairs, laid me on my bed, and I couldn't move. I had no feeling from the waist down. I had a fractured pelvis, broken back, crushed chest, and multiple other injuries. And my parents left me there for 24 hours. My mother put a heating pad on my back, and since I couldn't feel it, I got a third-degree burn and ended up with a bad decubitus ulcer. And when I still couldn't walk the next day, I had to haul myself on my arms down to the car, get to a clinic, and he sent me straight to the hospital and it was not the best situation. It wasn't a trauma center. There weren't any neurosurgeons or neurologists there. And I kind of laid on my back for a month. Um, it was a really difficult recovery. And the miracle is that I recovered. I made a full recovery without much intervention, no therapy. My back, uh, the vertebrae in my lower back fused themselves. I didn't have anything done. I didn't have surgery, and which was kind of, I mean, it was truly a miracle. And what were we talking about? What else were we talking about? That's the elevator version. I did recover.
Sure.
Ended up I ended up out of school for a while, but I did start school in the fall on crutches, and then I changed when I came back. Stopped doing drugs, no smoking, broke up with the kids I was hanging out with. Jesus didn't tell me to do that. I just did that, and I kept my head down, stopped rebelling, graduated from school a year early, and went to Israel, because if there was one thing I knew, it was that I needed to go to Israel so I could walk where Jesus had walked. I had to be there. And I was Jewish anyway. I wanted to go to Israel anyway, but I stayed in a kibbutz in the Galilee and learned Hebrew, went everywhere he might have gone, stayed in the Garden of Gethsemane overnight. I just had to do it. I had to walk where he had walked.
Heidi, and I'm just going to briefly speak to our audience, because there is something about somebody who is Jewish and finds their Messiah that makes that person just the just a it's like finding home. And I love what we call typically Messianic Jews,
Mhm.
because it's like you found home, and you went on your journey to Israel. And I had the benefit of spending some time during a taping with Heidi. and I got to know her personally a bit. And I can tell you that she is on fire. She is the real deal. I mean, she loves the Lord. What I'm curious about, Heidi, obviously, as Sean mentioned, I do want to get to your hospice and how that influenced your nursing of those who are dying. But first of all, when you returned and you went on your journey to Israel and walked in Christ's steps, uh, your parents, you know that in the Jewish faith, you're considered orthodoxy dead to the
Mhm.
family
Mhm.
once you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. And how did that impact you? And did you keep it a secret, the story from your family? Did you share? And what was their response? And how did that influence your relationship with them?
Well, my father, I still have a relationship with them. It's dysfunctional for other reasons, but I did tell my parents that I had died and met Jesus. I died, met Jesus, and gone to heaven when I was in the hospital. I told them the second day I was hospitalized when they came to visit me. My father went deadly silent, got pale. My mother just said, "Oh, don't be silly." But they called in a psychiatrist and they called in a rabbi who, at that time, our Orthodox synagogue had closed, and we belonged to a Reform temple in Omaha. They called in a rabbi who was an atheist. He was a secular humanist to counsel me. And the psychiatrist didn't talk much about this. He just talked around it. I He listened to me, but he didn't say anything, which was probably a good thing. The rabbi just said, "Oh, we imagine a lot of things when we're unconscious." Well, I wasn't. And I said, "I wasn't unconscious. I was dead." And after that, I didn't talk about it. My father has, in fact, never read my hospice book because he doesn't want to deal with death and dying. And he certainly doesn't want to deal with the fact that I died and met Jesus. So we don't talk about it. My sisters and I have talked about it, especially my little sister. She was very impacted by this accident. So I can talk to her about it. And I didn't really talk about it at all. My kids are aware of the story, but it wasn't until I heard John Burke interviewed a number of years ago that I contacted him and then I was able to talk about it. I just I can't talk about it with Jewish people because Jesus is kind of a bad word, and I'm Jewish and my kids are Jewish. I'm married to a Jewish man, um, but it's just kind of hard to talk to. It was hard for me to talk to to open up to Christians as well because I just didn't want to be. I just felt like, who's going to believe me? I don't I know the experience was true, the most true thing that's ever happened to me, the most real thing. It's real, real. That's the only way I can describe it is it's real, real. And I just decided I'm not going to talk about it. So it took me a lot of years to go public with this. It's difficult to be a Jewish person who met Jesus and accepts Jesus as the Jewish Messiah. It's really hard. You don't really fit into the Jewish community anymore. As you said, Randy, you kind of are declared dead, either dead or an idiot. So, um, and I'm not a Jew for Jesus. I'm not going to be at an airport telling people to believe in Jesus. I didn't. That's not my thing. So, um, that's
Well, and I'd love to hear next, Heidi, about so how did your experience tie into like your life and calling? Like I always feel like people come back obviously marked by what they experienced, but um, why did you end up becoming a nurse and a hospice nurse? And like, what did you see kind of, I guess, as your purpose or the reason God sent you back? I feel like everybody always has some kind of a mission or something that they feel like God sent them back for.
he didn't give me any mission. Basically, what I learned was you die, you go to heaven, you meet God, you come back and you live your life and you be a good person. That's the message I got. But I got more than that, but that's the basic message. And what I knew was that I wanted to have children and raise them to be good people. Um, I never intended to become a nurse. It was the last thing I wanted to do. My goal from the time I was a child was to be a great writer, be a an alcoholic and dead before I was 30. That's what I was going to be. And I did. I majored in creative writing with a minor in religious studies, specializing in Judaic studies. And when it was kind of a complicated situation. I ended up getting married to someone else, had a kid, couldn't get a job after a divorce. I ended up getting a divorce when my son was leaving that marriage when my son was 5 months old, and I needed a job. So I went to nursing school. It was the most practical decision I've ever made. I don't tend to be a practical person. And I loved it. I I intended to become a nurse midwife. That didn't work out because I had to make money. So I went into coronary care and intensive care. That was where the money was. I had to support my son. And I did that for a lot of years. And then one day stepped into hospice. And I think it was after I was dealing with a lot of dying people in intensive care and coronary care. And I lost a lot of patients. I mean, they either basically they die or they live when they're in intensive care and coronary care. And there was one person who, in particular, who touched me, and it kind of shifted my focus from bringing life, helping to usher life into this world, to helping to usher life out of this world. I kind of view it as two sides of the same coin. I don't view it as death. I view it as another birth. And I got a job as working full time as a hospice intake coordinator, and then decided no, I would rather just see patients myself, and did that for 12 years until we moved up here. So it was pretty great.
Yes. Well, what do you say, Heidi, to somebody who is most people, I want to say everyone, but I guess I'll say most, struggle with dying. There's nothing grandiose about the process itself. The body gives way
Hmm.
and it succumbs, the heart stops, the brain
Yep.
follows, and that stops as well. So, how do you, given your perspective of being with Jesus in heaven, how do you minister to somebody dying, or the loved ones of somebody dying differently, or now or the past, knowing what you know about heaven? How do you minister to them to give them encouragement, and maybe to give our audience encouragement as well? Because bottom line, we're all going to be there, right?
Yeah.
With our loved ones, perhaps first, but with ourselves certainly, and eventually. How do you how do you use that to minister to those who are dying, and the loved ones who are dying?
Well, the death of the patients I've taken care of, it's not easy for me either. I've spent a lot of time crying with patients and crying with families, but I'm confident, and they trust me because I think they can see my confidence that I'm not afraid of death. Am I afraid of getting old and infirm? You bet. Nobody wants that to happen, but I'm not afraid of death. And I think my patients and their families, who are very in a very vulnerable situation, pick up on that. Um, I hold hands. I am willing to listen to anything anyone has to say. I'm willing to listen to any fears, any angers, any hurts, any slights. I don't judge. I'm not going to judge. That's not my job. My job is to provide comfort and ease suffering. And I think that's what made me a really good hospice nurse is I I have a great affinity, a great compassion for anyone who's suffering. And I think if I can ease the pain, ease the suffering, ease the transition, God will handle the rest. I have every confidence in God to do what he needs to do for every single person, every single soul on this earth. And I don't have to control that. I'm willing to turn that control over to him. Um, So that's the biggest thing I learned. I don't have to judge my patients. I have taken care of patients who were everything from drug dealers to mafia people to who knows what. I don't care. It's not my job to judge them. It's my job to ease their pain. And and I have gotten very attached to most of my patients. Some were really difficult, but even those patients, I'm not going to judge them. I'm just going to deal with their issues. So I just have confidence in God that He's going to judge. If He took care of me, believe me, He's going to take care of them. If He took care of me with my background, He's is not going to abandon anyone. What we decide in this life and after this life is up to us. We still have the capacity to make our own decisions. We have free will. God and I talked about that a lot when I was going through a really difficult period after my divorce the first time around. And I realized that it's our decision. God opens a lot of doors for me, and a lot of times I just run into the wall instead. That's what I do. I'm very headstrong. He knows that. He knows every single thing about me. And sometimes when I do really stupid stuff or I'm really stubborn, I'm like, He made me. He knows what I am. I'm probably going to do a lot of more stupid stuff in my life, but He gave me those choices. He didn't say, you have to do this. He gave me a whole lot of choices. He gives us all choices. So,
I think in the same way that we are with our own children, God is that same way with us, where He wants the best. He gives us the guidance, but just like happens with our own kids, sometimes we do run into that wall, and we we do make those interesting decisions. But I find more often than not, we learn a lot in that process
yes.
on our journey with God, and also as we're parenting our own kids, even into their adult years. Heidi, I want to make sure we have you mention your book. Based on what I do for a living and all of my content, the audience we are curating is a book loving audience. I know many of them will want to find out more of your story and some of the other stories that we share that you share in your book. So tell us what's the title, and just give us a kind of a preview of what they'll encounter there, because it's not just your story that you feature in the book.
No, it's not. The title of the book is One Foot in Heaven, Journey of a Hospice Nurse. And I use my maiden name, Heidi Teltner. I'll show you a cover. My son created the cover. I wanted the focus to be on my hospice patients, because it is their journeys that changed me, that really changed my life for the better. I touch on my own near-death experience. And when I was writing the book, the publisher made me take out any references to Jesus. I'm just going to be very clear about that. He wanted this book to be sort of ecumenical, not put anyone off. He wanted everyone to read it. I have not rewritten it. I've left it alone. John Burke is bugging me to write a second book, which I will be doing. It's just that I've kind of gone from one catastrophe over the past 3 years to another. So that book is coming. It's about a third of the way done. And maybe the title will be Surfing with God. I'm not quite sure. But you can find that book on Amazon, One Foot in Heaven. And it's, as my little sister says, you will laugh, you will cry, you will be horrified, but you'll love the book. It's a lot of really disgusting things happen when you're a nurse.
Mm. You and I share that too. From being on the clinical, I was more on the business side and, working within the operating room, and you were on the nursing side, working both in intensive care, cardiac, and now with hospice. There's a difference, I think, for those who come from a clinical background, having this experience, from those who, let's say, don't, because I don't know about you, Heidi, but my propensity is to want to put it in terms of what's going on physiologically and psychologically and all of those things, and, God kind of turns that upside down to now of having an experience and intimacy, as you said, the person with the person of love, versus, let's say, what our perception of love is, and you and I share that, because how do you describe love as a person, and not just as an emotion?
Yeah, I know. And I have no clue. The living embodiment of love. And that's the only thing you get to take with you when you die is love. You don't get to take anything else. There's not a single material thing on this planet that I couldn't lose. I could lose anything that I own, any possession. Doesn't matter to me. What matters are the people in my life, the people I interact with, the people I love, my family, my pets. That's what matters to me. There is material possessions or nothing. Sure, it's great to be comfortable. It's great to have a house. It's great to have a roof over your head. But if I lost all of that, I would still have God. So that's it's very interesting. I mean, you take love with you. That's all you get to take. That's it. Nothing else.
Sean, the great thing about Sean, Heidi, is that you and I are like, oh yeah, yeah, that's right. I mean, yeah, exactly. That's the way it is. And Sean's sitting there uh, learning through these explanations. You've now had the vantage point, Sean, of hearing many of these stories. And how do you see the continuity of this and what Heidi has shared? Obviously unique in many respects. What's your takeaway that's kind of unique, because God seems to speak to us based on like what Heidi as a teenager, surfing in on the light and what have you. What's your takeaway on how God responds to us uniquely based on where we're at in life, or age, or agnostic, Christian, what have you?
Well, on the one hand, I'll certainly say that there are a lot of commonalities with everybody's experience as we have more of these conversations, and we're able to really say, okay, that's pretty typical. We had a lot of people who've had those. However, at the same time, I always feel like everybody's experience is kind of tailor made for them. Like it often people see and connect with things on the other side of the veil that are very specific to the things they love and who they are, and God responds and connects to them in a way that's significant and meaningful for them. Probably the part that really sticks out to me with Heidi's journey, and just based on the little bit she shared about her challenging background, to be in the Father's lap and just being able to hug him. I'm guessing that was extremely significant for you, Heidi. You know, as you've pondered and processed this through the years, like as you look back on that aspect of your experience, does that stand out for you in a special way, or as you look back, like what have you thought about that particular part of your experience? Because to me, that's the one thing that stands out that's extremely unique for your journey.
That was the best thing in the history of the world. Since time was created, that was the best thing ever. And I thought surfing was the best, but that was the best. I don't think it would have mattered what age I was. When you're sitting on his lap, you're still a little kid in your father's arms. And like I said, I was kicking my feet like a 3-year-old. I There was just this sense of belonging and perfection and acceptance. It didn't matter what I had done or hadn't done. He loved me exactly the way I was. And yeah, I actually have a very good memory. I can remember back a long ways, but these memories are just burned into my consciousness. You don't forget this stuff, and you don't forget the feelings associated with it. And I know when I met Randy, he's just a real sentimental guy, and he tears up pretty easily when he talks about his experience. I actually don't, because all I remember is this amazing, incredible joy, this joy beyond words. It was, well, kind of like having my kids was similar, but it was the most joyous thing that has ever happened to me. So, and I think the other thing is because I was young, I was like, I'll go with this. I'm a teenager. I'll just, if this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm doing. I can go with this. I was pretty flexible. I think with kids, God can be a little more flexible and do a few more things, a little different.
You have the benefit of not having had as much of the baggage that we have
Right.
as adults, and not even. And I'm not even talking about experiences. I just think as we go along, we put up a lot more boundaries because we've lived
Yep.
life and we experience things. But you think of how we all were as kids. We thought we could do anything. We could take on the world. We were all fabulous artists. All the things.
Yeah.
When there you don't have all those outside kind of forces speaking into our lives and holding us back or putting us down. So yeah, that is interesting, that aspect of your story, because again, I think that you're the first person that we've talked to with, well, there's maybe one other, but she's had multiple near death experiences. So in terms of your experience, I think you're our first guest who's had a very specific experience as a minor, so to speak.
Mhm.
Well, Randy, it's nearing time for us to wrap up, so I will toss the baton to you and give you the last question. So, however you want to move us towards wrapping up, sir, I will
Okay.
let you do that.
Well, I came up with another book title consideration now.
All
Sitting
right.
in God's Lap.
Oh, that's another good one. I like that because I have
So
struggled with this title.
That is better probably than the surfing one. And
yeah, the other one
Heidi,
might have.
hats off to your son. That was a good book cover. Not as a guy who sees lots of book covers, very fetching. So
Thank you. I'll let
Yes,
him know.
very telling. Heidi, I have just one final question for you because your experience came from a point, obviously, your faith, your position, Jewish, what you've been told, abuse factored into your childhood. And that's something that, can stay forever
Mhm.
with a person in the flesh. So, just the final question I had, because I've been involved in emergency foster care and I have an adopted son who went through horrendous abuse. Um, for those who are just, again, speaking to the audience, for those who are kind of struggling with that, they went through abuse, and there's so many cases of that abuse of different kinds. How can you speak to somebody, as far as the healing that Jesus gave you, being in his lap, being with him, that helped assuage or mend or just heal what you had gone through, as a young person?
Well, I this my life didn't change immediately. I went through a lot more after that experience. But when I say that the last thing Jesus said to me was, "Your life is in good hands," and it haunted me, I felt guilt because I felt, why me? Why isn't everyone's life in good hands? And then it hit me, everyone's life is in good hands. Whether what happens is good, whether what happens is challenging, whether what happens is a tragedy, is sad, is bad, he's still there. And the thing that always kept me going was the fact that I knew God was with me. Whatever was happening with me, he was right there with me. And I will be very honest and say that I have never felt anger with God. I've never blamed God. I had this sense that whatever was happening to me wasn't happening because it was God's plan. It wasn't happening because God was all in with this. It was happening because human beings are flawed and sinful. And I can only say that what I realized was, even if horrible things happened in my life, God would still be with me. My life would still be in his hands. That is what I took away from this. That's what I learned. And it didn't mean, here, I now give you a perfect life. That's not what it meant. None of us has a perfect life. And I'm so sorry for everyone who experiences abuse. I feel really fortunate because God created me a pretty optimistic, cheerful person. I'm a happy person. The abuse has affected my sisters differently than it affected me. And they've struggled. I think dying gave me a new lease on life. Weird to say, but dying gave me a new lease on life. continued to struggle in their lives with what we experienced. It's just such a hard subject. And I just want, if any of your listeners are experiencing abuse, I understand. I'm sorry. And I know God is with you. It may not seem like it, but if he was with me, he's with you too. So hard.
Well, thank you for that, Heidi. That was a very encouraging and compassionate way to help us wrap up the conversation. Again, I want to make mention of the book one more time. It is titled One Foot in Heaven, Journey of a Hospice Nurse, available wherever great books are sold. Reality is 60 to 80% of all books are sold on Amazon. So if you want to
Yeah.
read or listen to Heidi's own journey and the journey of some of the people that she worked with as a hospice nurse, you can find that. I'll include links in the show notes for this episode. You can just click on through and pick up your copy after you're done with the interview. And Heidi, I would encourage you to work on that next book. It sounds like John is pressuring you to move in that direction, and it sounds like you might have more to share that you've not shared in this first book. So, whenever you get to having that next book done, I would love to have you back on my show, and Lord willing, two Christian dudes will still be going as well. So Randy and I can do another conversation with you as well. But uh, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for sharing with us and pouring into our audience. It's such a blessing, even though we've done a lot of these conversations already. I feel like each journey, each story that we get to help share and help tell, it touches the people who listen to it and view it in a different way. And I know there are going to be people who encounter this conversation where some of the specific aspects of your story is exactly the thing that they needed to hear. I find more often than not the responses we get, God's speaking to them about something, and they'll encounter a piece of content like this. And that's the thing that clicks, or it makes all the difference, or they know that God sees them, God hears them, and your story is no exception. I have no doubt for years to come, we're going to get comments and letters about how your journey made an impact on somebody else's journey with God. So thank you. It's truly an honor and a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you. It's great.
Yes.
It's great
Thanks,
to speak
Heidi.
to you. Thanks, Randy. So nice
Thank
to
you.
see you.
Great to
Nice
see
to meet
you.
you, Sean.
Yes, and to all of you who continue to endure these episodes of the Two Christian Dudes, we love you. We appreciate you. Whether you watch us on YouTube or Facebook, or you listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever it happens to be, like, share, review, all the things. Help us get the word out about the podcast. For season one, again, we're going to continue finishing up. We've got a few episodes left. I believe this one will air is probably around episode 8 or 9. If you have guest suggestions, we'll get back to near-death experiences probably in season 4 or 5. So please leave a comment with other ideas. We're always eager to find out about more men and women who have powerful near-death experiences that we could potentially bring to light on the show. Or if you have ideas for other topics, please share. We are open to suggestions. So anyways, thanks for joining us. We'll see you again soon, and take care out there.
Thank you. See you.
Thanks.